Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's show, I'm going to review the film Anora. And today's episode is going exclusively to Anora because I have so much to say about it. I really just want to give it its own time and its own place. So today's episode is exclusively on Anora. And let's get started. So I had heard great things before going to see this movie. You know, even besides just like good reviews, it won the grand prize at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year, which is a very prestigious film festival, and that's like the huge honor. It really won the grand prize there, so that's really worth noting. And again, it just had also really good reviews. It has, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, it has 97% on there with a critic score, so almost every single critic liked it. And looking at the average score, it has an 8.9 out of 10, which means not only did people like it, people love it. And again, I want to really clarify on Rotten Tomatoes. That could be a whole separate discussion, but Rotten Tomatoes is typically, the percentage isn't saying the movie, how good the movie actually is. It's just saying how many people liked it. 97% could mean that people just thought it was an okay movie, but still gave it a thumbs up, and therefore it's like everyone liked it. But no, in this case, it's actually an 8.9 average score with over 200 reviews, so that means people really love this movie overall. That's critics, and audiences too give it a 92%. So definitely people are enjoying this one overall. There's not a lot of people who didn't like it. But taking that all away, I saw the trailer a couple times in theaters and didn't really take much note on it. I mean, even with all the great buzz from the festivals, I just didn't look very far into what it was about. I didn't really pay too close attention to the trailer. I wasn't too in love with what that looked like. But all I knew is that it's kind of like a Cinderella story, but very explicit in content. And, just really the trailers weren't getting me into this movie, but the reviews were, and then, people's word of mouth were. So that's kind of what I was going in for. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think this movie is amazing. I'm not going to give much away, but for reference, the basic gist of the story is that a sex worker meets a Russian guy at her place of work, and the two begin seeing each other more from there. And that's kind of where the plot takes off. It's really just, sex worker girl meets young Russian guy, and they really just start hitting it off and seeing each other more often. That's really all I'll say. I think saying any more would be giving the movie away. And I think this is just one of those movies, said it a few times in the past, where you just need to go in blind as possible, and that will really elevate your experience. So this is one of those movies I really don't want to give more away than literally what's shown in the opening couple of scenes. And really getting off into the positives here, Mikey Madison is one of the first things that comes to mind. She's terrific here as the lead character, Anora. Sometimes she's called Annie, but she's great. It's one of those roles that looks probably easy on paper, you're watching the movie and you're this probably isn't that hard, but I think it actually is a very hard role in reality. There's lots of yelling, talking over people, being loud, but also not being annoying at the same time, and really letting her voice be heard. There's just something very likable about her performance here, and something very captivating about it as well, where I was constantly mesmerized watching her, being wow, she's really great. And there's also more to her than just the yelling and screaming. I mean, you see that throughout the entire movie, and especially by the end, she shows some real emotional acting chops. And I would dare even that she might get a Best Actress nomination. I think it's very possible. She is great. And moving on from her, you have Mark Eidelstein, who plays his character Ivan. He doesn't do anything exceptional in my opinion, but he plays his part well. This is the Russian guy that Mikey Madison's character, Anora, kind of gets to know. And again, he's fine. He served the purpose of the story. He's not someone to note too much, but I think that was partly intentional. I don't think, him not being a standout really affects the movie at all to me, but he does what he needs to do, and I think he does a fine job at it. And next is Yuri Borisov as Igor, who is very good in the movie. There's a lot to this character, despite being in the background a lot of the time. He's one of those characters who, just kind of lurks in the shadows, but you really do begin to notice him more and more as the film goes on. And he does a very good job. I'd imagine I'll, especially on rewatch, be paying extra attention to his performance. He doesn't even say a lot either, but just a lot shown with his facial expressions, his movements, and really, really liked his performance. Another one is Karen Kalagoan as Toros. He is hilarious. Everything he says is funny, and I need to see more of him ASAP. Really, just like the movie actually is very funny, but a lot of it goes to this guy in particular. Just everything he just says it with such a expression that it's just impossible not to laugh at. I'm just like smiling, like you can't see me, but I'm just like grinning ear to ear, just thinking about some of his his line delivery in the movie. He's so good. But really, the acting overall is a big standout here, and definitely worth seeing for that. Next up, though, is Sean Baker, the writer and director of this movie. Honestly, like, he deserves a Best Screenplay and Best Director nomination at the Oscars for sure. The movie is just so well written, and again, his direction is just so good too. I'll get in a little more of that, but he definitely deserves to be noted for how good this movie is and why it's as good as it is. Large reason for that is the script is so brilliantly written. It's a long movie. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes or so, but the movie is actually very well paced and goes through a lot of quick changes that all somehow feel seamless and natural. There's a lot of tonal changes going on, and Baker just finds really good ways of making it just feel smooth. There's also a lot of really big story changes that for a lot of directors would be very hard to pull off, but for Baker, he does a great job at it. And the script keeps you guessing a lot of the time, even if you're pretty sure you know what's going to happen, which did happen to me. I mean, it's a case where I think being right didn't bother me at all because the journey to the destination was still very worthwhile. Like it's a movie where I could kind of predict where it was going, and generally speaking, I think I was pretty accurate, but I wasn't like frustrated by that at all. I wasn't thinking like, oh, of course they did that. Like, it was just a natural progression of the story, and also just the journey in between that had some surprises and wasn't entirely predictable. So I think it kind of evened out because of that. And I also kind of love the ambiguity in this film. Characters don't always say what they mean or feel. It's really just up to you watching their expressions and the way they interact with each other. And by the end of the movie, you kind of get to replay a lot of what happens to unpack motives and unpack how characters were feeling and really just kind of see the movie through a different point of view. Because I really think the last third of this movie kind of asks you to really like take another look at these characters and what they were feeling for this movie, like why they were doing what they were doing. And I think movies are great like that. They just lead to discussion and lead to a lot of great conversation. And I think this movie does that so well. I kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but this movie is so funny. I was laughing hysterically at points, but the comedy never feels overplayed or goes too far. I mean, it does go very far, but it doesn't cross that line where the comedy just feels like it's taking over the story, or like scenes are just going on far too long because of it. It's just very well balanced. And the scenes with drama are also very, very good. Things get serious at points, and the scenes are well written and acted so well to convey that. And I really think there are a few moments in particular that really struck me at how mature it got, like from what you were going from. And it's just a character point of view also very good. Like you really feel for these characters. And there are a few scenes especially that really just like upon rewatch I think will have different meaning to them. Like the first time you watch it, you're thinking like, oh, this is a pretty funny scene. And I think on reflection, some of the scenes weren't as funny to these characters as maybe we thought they were. And I think it just really adds a lot to this movie. It adds some depth and, again, more conversation about like what some of these scenes really meant. But going on to direction, the direction here is also great by Sean Baker. The first act does such an awesome job of communicating a clear tone and feeling to this movie. I love the opening few scenes where like it has some humor, but it's also very stylish. It has just really great technical aspects. The first act of this movie is very set on giving this feeling of fantasy and this perfect world. Like, it is truly like a Cinderella story with, so much graphic content, but it really communicates this feeling that everything is going so well, and it's kind of like a Disney movie, it's a princess movie, that like everything is perfect. And then later the movie has this switch, and similar to something like Parasite, it does this switch with ease and navigates it smoothly, so it's not jarring to you at all, but it still feels natural within the story, and it's just a progression of what's already happened. And by the end of the movie, it all clicks perfectly together. Like, you really just feel like this is one gigantic story. It takes you on a journey, an emotional journey with these characters, and does a very successful job at that. The movie also has lots of characters talking over each other, which doesn't get exhausting. I have to say, like, Sean Baker, major props to him, because this is something a lot of movies try and fail to do, which is have, a lot of people talking over each other to give this chaotic feeling of tension and maybe comedy at times. But a lot of the time when people do this, it just kind of gets distracting and isn't communicating what it's trying to do too well. Like, having a lot of characters talk over each other, it's like, oh my god, please someone stop talking so I can hear what they're saying. But the sound mixing here is also very impressive at that. So the voices you need to hear are very, loud and do a good job. But also, once again, like Mikey Madison, she's so good here, and just her yelling is very easy to make out. So that's great on her. But really, I have to just give a lot of credit to Sean Baker on this, because the whole talking over other characters is something the Safdie brothers do with a lot of ease, and not a lot of other people do it well, but Sean Baker does it very well too. I also want to shout out the cinematography here. The shots in this movie are gorgeous. They're very good, a lot of good colors, but also very natural looking colors at times I noticed. Like, when the movie's trying to look very, fantastical and sort of perfect, it gives a lot of bold colors, and when it needs to be a little more realistic, it goes into a little more subdued and realistic colors like you see in everyday life. And I think the editing also is just really good here, also done by Sean Baker. And I think the editing here is actually very important, because once again, it's trying to create this chaotic feeling at times, and sometimes it's trying to communicate a different feeling. And I think the editing, along with the music choices, really push in giving you this feeling of what the characters are going through. And I think when it needs to be like a little slower, it does that. When it needs to be more fast paced, it does that too. And it just all fits really, really well. Pacing overall is very good. It's a long movie. As I said, it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes or so, and it feels long. It's not a fast paced movie by any means, but it's never boring. And that's a really important thing to note. Like, slow burns are okay. Boring movies are not. And usually things play out in this movie and move on before it gets to be too much to handle. Like, some of the jokes in this movie go on for a while. But the movie knows kind of when to stop. Like, they kind of push it as far as it can go. And then I was like even noticing a couple times, I'm like, I don't know how much longer they can keep this going. And then once they, I got to that point, they kind of stopped the joke. But the movie pushes them pretty far. It kind of knows when to pull back, though. And it usually figures out when to kind of have a good balance of everything. But really, my only nitpick with this whole movie is maybe I would have liked a few scenes to be a little shorter. And it's not even throughout the entire movie. It's really just one section in the second act where the characters are kind of looking around the city. And I think just they were trying to get to a certain point, but I feel like you could have done a lot of it in more of a montage instead of just kind of like, having each individual scene to get to this place. I don't know if I'll feel differently about that on rewatch, but just from my first viewing, I just kind of thought even then it was kind of a little too long, and some of like the scenes that didn't really progress the story that much could maybe be a little shorter. That might just help the pacing be a little tighter, but that's really my only problem with this movie, and that's not even like a major thing. It's really just like, oh, I would have liked if they did that. I never thought any of the scenes were boring or lost my interest. It could have just been a little less long, but that's really it. I think this is an excellent, excellent film. It could absolutely be a frontrunner this award season. I think it could get a ton, including Best Picture, Best Actress, maybe Best Supporting Actor even. I'm sure some technical categories as well. This movie just has a ton of great stuff going for it, and I think a lot of people should see it. I think especially you should go see it with a crowd in theaters. I think it only enhances this movie, and just hearing everyone's reaction is just like awesome. You could really tell everyone was into the movie too, and I just had a great time watching this movie. Go in as blind as you can, don't watch the trailer, just go see it. Go see it with a big crowd. I think you'll enjoy it. I really just have so many great things to say about it. It's easily one of my favorite movies of the year. Top 3 for sure. And I think by the end of the year, it'll be pretty high up there as well. So definitely go see it. I give it an A. Really great film. But that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.